Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Glickman, former congressman from the 4th Congressional District of Kansas, former Secretary of Agriculture, lifelong Kansan, and I'm delighted to serve with former Congresswoman Lynn Jenkins as co-chair of the Kansas Advisory Committee for the USGLC, U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. I want to welcome you all to the virtual conversation between the USGLC and Senator Jerry Moran, my friend for a very long time. This country faces real global challenges, pandemics, global crises, and the stakes have never been higher for U.S. leadership in the rest of the world. And here in Kansas, whether you're on our advisory committee or whether you're just in the audience watching us, we have large numbers of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, faith-based people, business, humanitarians, civic officials, veterans, and really folks who are just generally interested in the role that we can play in leading the rest of the world. We have advisory committees all over our country, but it's particularly important to me that we have a strong one in Kansas. My belief is that when America leads, we all win. And we win in terms of our strategic interests in the world, national security, our economic interests, our values, and these things impact us in Kansas so much, whether it's in the agriculture, in aviation, high tech, or all the other interests that we have from our state. So saying that, welcome to everybody here, our advisory committee and others who are watching this virtual conversation. And I want to turn the program over to our leader, our president of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, Liz Schreier.
So thank you, Dan, Secretary Glickman. You've been such a wonderful friend of USGLC, and I know how proud your fellow Kansans are of all you have accomplished. So welcome to everyone. I know there are folks all from literally across the state, Kansas City and Dodge City and Junction City, Scott City, Topeka, Lansing, Fort Leavenworth, Wichita, and more. And it's just so wonderful to be with friends. I wish I was there in person, but so wonderful. And a big shout out to all of our partners who helped make this conversation happen. Now, I can't promise rocket launches like Blue Origin from our program, for our program, but we have a terrific conversation with an incredible champion of fighting global hunger and so much more with Senator Jerry Moran. He's in the Zoom room. He's going to be introduced in just a moment, but let me just tell you a little bit about our conversation today. Some of you are new to the USGLC, and we're so thrilled that you joined us. We are known as the Strange Bedfellow Coalition. I don't think we're that strange, but I think we got that title being called that because we do one thing unique. We bring people together that don't always sit in the room at the same time, and we're so proud of it. Business leaders and veterans and faith leaders and nonprofits, farmers from literally all over the country, as Dan Glickman said. And we believe, like Senator Moran, that America's engagement in the world really matters to every American family. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. You know, as we all know, the world has changed so dramatically over the last year. Obviously, the global pandemic being the most significant, but so much more. The democracy is under attack. A global competition is heating up, and global hunger is on the rise. And America simply can't ignore what's happening outside of our borders. It's impacting our health, it's impacting our economy, it's impacting our security. And let's just go back to the global pandemic for a moment. As long as this virus is anywhere, none of us are safe. And we have seen that the virus can move in 36 hours to be right back at our doorstep. And with the Delta variant, we all remain vulnerable. So we at USGLC have taken some lessons that we saw after Ebola, that investing in development, diplomacy, global health, food security really makes a difference for every American family. It keeps us safe, it makes us healthier, it helps open up markets, it creates jobs. So we have just launched our largest and most significant campaign ever, Foreign Aid, What's It Worth? To tell the story about how we ensure that this global pandemic never, ever happens again, to make sure that we confront global challenges before they spiral out of control and end up at our doorstep. So together, with your help, we're going to highlight the countless benefits of U.S. investments in development, diplomacy, global health on everyday lives and showcase why these matter. So we're going to ask the question, with your help, foreign aid, what's it worth? Development, what's it worth? Diplomacy, what's it worth? Global health, what's it worth? And I think we're going to see clearly that the answer from Kansas is pretty simple. It means healthier lives here at home. It means safety for those who serve. It means customers for our farmers and our small businesses here in Kansas. And I'll just end with one simple example. That's right here in McPherson, Kansas. You saw that the U.S. recently purchased and announced 500 million Pfizer vaccine doses that the U.S. is providing to address the global effort. Millions of those doses have been manufactured in a massive manufacturing facility right here in Kansas. That means that Kansas is part of ground zero in not only saving lives, but protecting Americans from stopping the new variants from around the world spreading. And what's it worth? It also means jobs here in Kansas. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. I invite you to be part of the conversation as we go along. You can visit usglc.org/what's it worth and use the hashtag what's it worth. So to introduce our guest speaker and to be part of the conversation, I recently was in a radio tour, a little bit of Kansas with our USGLC co-chair, Kansas Advisory Committee co-chair, Congresswoman Lynn Jenkins, and it was really wonderful to do that with her. And she is going to be part of the conversation by introducing Senator Jerry Moran. Lynn, over to you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to my Kansas co-chair and good friend, Dan Glickman. This is such an important conversation, and I'm honored to be a part of it today with USGLC. I'm now pleased to introduce our special guest, who you all know well, Senator Jerry Moran. He's been hard at work addressing the challenges of COVID-19 and keeping Kansans and Americans safe. Senator Moran has spent his career in public service, serving Kansans in Congress for more than 2 decades, first in the House of Representatives and now in the Senate. During his time in Congress, he's been a strong supporter of America's development and diplomacy programs, particularly international food assistance programs, and he is the co-chair and co-founder of the Senate Hunger Caucus. From his seat on the powerful Senate Appropriations Committee, including the subcommittee responsible for resourcing America's international affairs programs, he knows firsthand the value of America's global leadership. Senator, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, welcome, Senator.
Good afternoon. Hello, Liz. Hello. It's great to be with you all. Thank you very much. Lynn, Congresswoman Jenkins, thank you for the introduction. That's the nicest thing I've ever heard you say about me, and I'm pleased it made this visit worthwhile. No House member likes a senator, even when they're from the same state. And while Lynn and I served together and had lots of banter back and forth, we are very good friends, and I'm pleased to see that Lynn Jenkins is engaged in this effort that we're going to discuss today. So thank you very much to USGLC for the opportunity to join and have a conversation, and I look forward to the dialogue I'll have this afternoon with Kansans.
Well, we're so excited to be a part of this. I remember actually, Senator, the last time we saw each other was just days before Congress closed to the public due to COVID, and you and I were with a mutual friend of ours, David Beasley, head of the World Food Program, talking about global hunger, something you've been such a champion trying to fight over your time in the Senate and before. And you said, let's do this back in my hometown. So we're kind of doing it in the hometown through Zoom, but the truth is it means more people can even be involved in the conversation. So I'm going to ask a few questions and then we'll bring in some of your constituents. And I have to say, Senator, I'm so struck by how many Kansans have had a long history of commitment and understanding of what it's worth for America to be engaged in the world. Your former colleagues like Bob Dole and Nancy Kassenbaum people like Bob Gates and Mike Pompeo, Pat Roberts, our own Dan Glickman. And I want to know, what's the secret in the water in Kansas of producing leaders like yourself who care so deeply about the local community, but understand we need to be engaged in the world, and maybe personally what influenced your own thinking growing up in Kansas about America's global leadership, Senator?
Liz, thank you. And while Secretary Glickman is with us this afternoon, I would join you in my praise for him, his leadership in Congress, particularly then as a Secretary of Agriculture. And just a guy who every once in a while will pick up the phone and try to make sure that he keeps me on the right track, at least in his view. And I am grateful for Dan Glickman and that relationship. You're nice to compliment Kansans. I mean, I would love to say that we generally have common sense and we see the world kind of in that way. We're not about huge government. We're not about big spending programs, but when we see a need, there's a genuine desire on the part of most Kansans to roll up their sleeves and see if they can't solve a problem. And I also would say that many Kansans grew up with a belief in God, an understanding of the role that faith plays in our lives, the biblical commitments that we are instructed to follow in regard to how do we care for our neighbor? How do we make certain that we're not just self-centered? And so I like the attributes of Kansans and just the way they look at things and the way they look at the world. And of course, it is also a component of what you described in my world. I mean, I would not discount Senator Kassebaum, who was a significant leader for example, in the elimination of apartheid in South Africa, served on the Foreign Affairs Committee. But Bob Dole has played a significant role in Kansas's lives. Most Kansans over a certain age still look at Bob Dole and Nancy Kassebaum as somebody they wish that was their senators. And there is just this desire on the part of those of us that follow people like Senator Dole to try to replicate some of the things that he was able to accomplish in regard particularly to hunger, but many other topics. And so there's just a legacy in our state. Finally, I would add that particularly when it comes to hunger, Kansas, an agricultural state, an agricultural producing state, one that certainly produces more than we can consume in our state or in the United States, understands the important role that food markets play in the economy, the ability to help feed the world is a way that we earn a living in Kansas. But I also would say that it's not just economic, it is as well, it's a moral component. When we see so much abundance, and for a long time I've carried around, and in fact used a photograph of piled grain in Kensington, Kansas, near the elevator, stacked as high, piled as high as the grain elevator itself, using that to talk to political leaders here in Washington, D.C. to demonstrate we ought to be doing more in regard to food aid around the world when there's such an abundant supply. And Kansans see that many months throughout the year. And so that moral and economic component come together because of the agricultural nature of our state. And I would say, I'll try to be brief about the question of my role. It started in the House of Representatives. I've described this to you, Liz, before, but I wanted to make certain that my time in Congress was well spent, in the sense that something more than just doing the normal things that a politician or a member of Congress does. And I generally believe, although there's always exceptions, that we do a good job of answering the mail, and I'm out and about with town hall meetings, and we do tremendous efforts to try to take care of Kansans and what we call casework. So trying to be a good congressman in those days, now a good senator, but that ought to be insufficient. Even being a good congressman or a good senator is insufficient to make sure that we're doing things that are more long lasting, more than just a momentary pat on the back that says you're doing a good job. And I have to say that with a smile. It would suggest I never look at my Facebook page. So I understand that those compliments are not easily found these days, but it is more than just that pat on the back that says, way to go. It is making certain that you do something that is longer lasting, improving the world. And hunger, particularly with the legacy of Senator Dole, hunger, particularly with the nature of our agricultural state, became one of those causes. And we helped create and lead the House Hunger Caucus. And when we came to the Senate, we revived the Senate Hunger Caucus and have tried to engage in those issues that are important to us as members of Congress, but more importantly, make a difference in the world.
Well, I'm going to give you a compliment because I think it's extraordinary. I mean, I remember when you showed me that picture of that big pile of wheat, and it was when we were having a meeting with David Beasley, and at the time we were talking about how your role in the Senate Hunger Caucus, you've been a champion of combating food insecurity, was actually getting better. Global hunger but now is on the rise for the first time in decades. I saw a UN report recently that there's a 15% increase in the number of people who are going hungry in the world, largely because of the global pandemic. And I want to probe a little bit more so your constituents can hear you talk about it and understand it, about this interconnection between your state and how forward-leaning it is on these issues. And maybe you could talk about it. I saw that in Manhattan, Kansas, home to Kansas State University, KSU is home to these incredible innovation labs. Feed the Future, a program that is fighting global hunger, and they brought in over $100 million of investments to the labs of cutting research of sorghum and millet, and using their agriculture know-how and research to partner to promote food security, combat malnutrition in places like Senegal, Niger, Ethiopia, and really using your know-how, your agricultural work to feed the world. Can you share of what you're seeing about what we need to be doing to combat global hunger? What works out there? What do we need? You've talked about, I've heard you talk about, we're not doing enough. What is working out there?
Well, Liz, thank you for the question, although it is a difficult one to answer. And, I would say that I, as a member of the Senate Hunger Caucus, and maybe I should take a moment to say that's just a group of senators who voluntarily banded together, created an organization that takes on projects of combating hunger, educates ourselves and our staff, tries to educate our colleagues in Congress about what we can do to eliminate the pain that comes from people going to bed on a daily basis without a sufficient nutrition, sufficient food for the day. And I would say that from a Kansas perspective, there's plenty of people who get involved in this hunger issue, and many of my colleagues, let me say it that way, their perhaps sole focus, or at least primary focus, is on food programs, the nutrition programs, foods, what we used to call food stamps. It's about giving somebody something to buy food. And I certainly understand the importance of that. But mine is a bit of a step back, because I believe that agriculture in Kansas and around the country, around the United States of America, through the application of technology, science, can increase the amount of food that's available. And it's something that not necessarily everybody, that view might not be brought to the normal kinds of folks who get together and talk about how do we make sure that nobody goes to bed hungry. And so we're certainly supportive of the kind of programs that help Americans in particular meet their needs, their daily needs. But I've also tried to bring to this conversation the belief that through science, and you mentioned Kansas State University and Feed the Future, those are programs designed not just to solve the problem of people being hungry today, but how do we end the systemic nature of hunger around the globe. And science, engineering, agricultural efforts are the way that can be accomplished. And again, something that's not always thought of as at the top of the list when trying to combat hunger. Knowing the productivity of Kansas farmers and ranchers has allowed me to be a better voice for this belief that science can make a significant difference when it is combined with the labor of love that Kansas producers have for what they do for a living. And what satisfaction it comes to those Kansas farmers and ranchers when they know what they're producing is solving hunger around the globe. So it is just a component of it that sometimes is overlooked. And Feed the Future, as you mentioned, is a program that we've been successful in getting USAID dollars to the university for that purpose. And that program seems to continue to grow with more instructions coming from USAID about what can be done. I also failed to mention, Liz, that my committee assignments lend themselves to the capability of being engaged in these issues. And one of the topics that we haven't yet touched on, although it was mentioned in the introduction, I mean, in the Republican majority days, I chair the Committee on Veterans Affairs. In the Democrat majority days, I'm the ranking Republican. And so in addition to the kinds of things we talked already about in food, I have this understanding or belief that when we call upon our men and women of this country to serve, to sacrifice, and potentially lose their lives, it's really important for those decision makers in Washington, D.C., the president and members of Congress, to have done everything else they can to prevent the need for that call to service to occur. We want to utilize and risk the lives of Americans only as a last resort. And the kinds of things we're talking about, including hunger and food, contribute to the instability of the world, the potential overthrow of government, the dissatisfaction that people have with their current government around the globe. And when those things that create that instability rise up and create a need for American military power, I think about how much better it would be for all of us in the safety and well-being of our military men and women's lives and their families, for the treasury of our country and the taxpayers, if we would have done everything we can initially to avoid that call to service in such a risky way. And so it just the number of veterans have been important to me since I was a 16-year-old kid in Plainville, Kansas high school. And in addition to that, I serve on the Appropriations Committee that funds, for example, USAID through the Appropriations Committee on Agriculture. I'm a member of the what's called SFOPS, which funds the State Department and our diplomacy efforts. And I'm a defense appropriator, a veteran appropriator, and all these things kind of come together to see what can I do to make certain that the risks that we face in this country are minimized, not increased.
They really do. You know, I go back to that conversation we had last time, and the World Food Program, as everybody listening may recall, won the Nobel Peace Prize. And they won it, just as you're saying, not in addition to saving lives, they won it because food was being used as a weapon of war. And they won it because exactly what you just said, Senator, because they were doing such a good job at protecting national security. So thank you for sharing that. And you're right, your committee assignments all connect. I want to go back to something that you talked about at the very beginning, which is this is about our economy as well. And how the economy and the impact of COVID has on Kansas agricultural exports. With close to 60,000 farms, as I understand, in Kansas, the majority of whom are family-owned. Kansas, before COVID, Kansas agriculture exports, as you know way better than I, totaled almost $5 billion in 2019. And I'm watching very closely, as I know you are, that U.S. exports are down. The latest statistic I saw from last year was down 16% due to the pandemic. Obviously, we saw the stock market took a dive yesterday as more and more news keeps coming out on the Delta variant. So connect to our participants today, how concerned you are about food insecurity from the economic point of view, where these aid programs, the State Department, all the work that you're doing on, as you say, SFOPs, the State Foreign Operations Subcommittee, these really do also matter in not just feeding the world, but also creating new jobs and bolstering our economic recovery from the pandemic going forward. These are our markets in the future.
That's absolutely the case. And I smile as you were describing the circumstance. And while the number of people that are on this visit involved in this conversation from Kansas is significant, I think there's a general dissatisfaction with money spent on what we would call foreign aid. What Kansans might say is, why are we spending money on foreign aid when we have our own problems in the United States? Well, there is the real reality that our problems in the United States can only increase as the world deteriorates around us. And so in part, that's economic. And I remember, this is back in my house days, so a number of years ago, a Kansan telling me, I just want to forget the rest of the world. Let's just take care of ourselves. And I'm certainly sympathetic to that point of view. I mean, I guess maybe in some ways I wish it was possible, but it's not. We're all interconnected. And what happens in Africa or Asia or Europe, I remember speaking at a high school graduation ceremony in Roselle, Kansas, Pawnee Heights, one of the first graduation speeches I ever gave. And I remember saying that in my growing up days, it didn't really matter what happened in Tokyo, or it didn't really matter what happened in Moscow. But today, go to the grain elevator and look at the price of wheat or cattle or corn, and all those places around the globe in part determine what that price of those commodities are at home. I smiled at a conversation that I had, again, a long time ago in my house days, in which this Kansan said, forget the rest of the world, just take care of ourselves. That conversation was with a Kansas wheat farmer. And I didn't have the nerve to say, well, what 40% of acres do you no longer want to plant, cultivate, and harvest? Because in the United States, we can produce food abundantly. And in fact, we can produce more food than we can consume with American consumers. And if we weren't going to trade or sell our agriculture commodities around the globe, about 48% of the acres that we plant in Kansas would not need to be cultivated. And what that means is that farmers have less of an opportunity to earn a return on their investment and their assets and to put food on their own family's table. But it also means that communities that I care so much about across our state, particularly our smallest ones, probably wouldn't be there, because in the absence of production agriculture, in the absence of those farm families, there is no grocery store, there's no grain elevator, there's no farm implement dealer. That means there's no taxes to be collected for the schools, the libraries, and the communities. And we begin to disappear. We're already battling that in the places in Kansas, particularly the places that I grew up in. And I want to do everything I can to make certain that small towns in rural Kansas, rural America has a future. And quite frankly, that future rests in whether or not agriculture production is successful, whether there's a return on the investment, whether or not a farmer is earning a living. It determines whether or not a farm family has another generation on their family farm. And that has a lot to do with our capabilities of exporting agriculture commodities around the globe in significant numbers. And at the moment, it's China has been a buyer of agriculture commodities, and that market is hugely important to Kansas producers' success. But all of that is very tenuous, and we have global competition around the world who would love to take our markets away from us, take our markets away from farmers. And so at all times, we have to be right on the cutting edge of technology and science and productivity, efficiency. Our infrastructure and transportation systems have to work well in order to compete in global economies. We earn a living in Kansas, almost in every community, and almost every community, if not, I could say every community in Kansas is affected if farmers are no longer farming and they're no longer capable of staying in business. So we earn a living in our home state by what we do in agriculture.
Well, let's bring in some of your constituents. There's a lot that wanted to ask questions. I'm going to bring in some of what we call our USGLC Kansas State Advisory Committee members. And I want to start with Jesse McCurry, Executive Director of the Kansas Grain Sorghum Commission. Jesse, you get the first question. Stump the senator.
Hi, Senator. I don't think I'll stump him, but I'll give him an opportunity to emphasize another important area to our business. Obviously, thank you for your comments on agriculture and exports, which are so critical. What some folks may not realize is that not just top export markets like Japan and New Zealand and developed countries are important for sorghum, but a lot of our potential opportunities are in developing nations, countries like Ethiopia and beyond, where we see some really fast-growing economies. I guess the question, Senator, is how can Congress and the Department of State to work together to broaden export opportunities in the developing world for sorghum and other crops from Kansas?
Jesse, thank you. And not to embarrass Liz, but the photograph that she saw was not wheat; it was grain sorghum, and we use grain sorghum to demonstrate to lots of folks, including President Trump, including the USTR trade ambassador, including the World Food Program, including the Secretary of Agriculture, to say, look at what we have here, particularly to the Director of USAID, look what we have here piled on the ground in Kansas. And we ought to be feeding mouths around the globe as a result of this. I've taken the word surplus out of my vocabulary. I almost said it just then. Out of this surplus of agriculture commodities, there is no surplus when people are starving. And so it's a matter of how we get it to those folks who need it so desperately. I would say that, Jesse, it is a reminder how not everything would necessarily be about a program in agriculture to export grain sorghum to some country. That's a component of it, but it begins with our relationship with those countries. What is our State Department doing? What is our ambassador doing? What is our liaison from the Department of Agriculture who works in one of those countries in our embassy? What are they doing to develop relationships? And then again, I wouldn't want to put all the burden or the responsibility is a better word than burden. I wouldn't want to give all the responsibility to the government to solve our challenges and open markets. What is the Grain Sorghum Association and the corn growers and everybody else? What are we doing as agriculture producers to make sure we have the connections and the ties and the relationships that allow for our agricultural products? Again, I would add a couple of other things, that just the quality of our crop, the testing of our crop, the safety, its transportation. So we can open more markets with relationships. It's not, there's no science involved in that, but we also need to deliver a high quality product that once it's delivered, that the customer wants more of it. And we also need to be looking for other opportunities. We talk about agriculture commodities as food. It's also fiber and it's also energy. And we have an opportunity in those arenas to help developing countries. And I think the point I guess I would make before just talking, because I don't have a good answer, is to complement or suggest what Jesse is saying is so true. We think of the biggest and best markets as where we ought to be focused. And we certainly wouldn't want to walk away from the biggest customer. But there's so much volatility in the world. And while I mentioned China, China is our adversary. And that market relationship can change very quickly. And we need to make certain that we don't have, I guess, a Kansas expression, our eggs all in one basket, our grain sorghum all in one basket. And so just those kind of relationships that you and your producers and our folks who are tasked at the Department of Agriculture and the State Department to develop those markets.
Thanks, Jesse. Well, I'm coming on a visit to Kansas next time. I'm gonna get my crops straight. So thank you.
I knew I shouldn't have said something, Liz, but I was taking I wanted the chance to impress Jesse without deflating you, and I didn't quite accomplish that. I'm sorry.
I want to learn. So our next question is Rick Burns. He's a veteran, and he currently is the president of Carida Project International. Rick, all yours.
As one who served in conflict areas of the world, Senator Moran, thank you for your support of those policies that are contributing to greater security and stability in the world. It's a very important aspiration that we should all have. Here in America's heartland, we understand the importance of helping others in times of need. That's why after my 3 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, I founded the Carida Project, a nonprofit to support poor and displaced women and children in those countries. As you know, there's no shortage of hotspots and conflict around the world today. So in your opinion, why are tools like diplomacy and U.S. humanitarian programs, development programs, a critical part of our national security toolkit to build more stability abroad? And should we be doing more on that front as a country?
Well, first of all, Rick, thank you for your service to our country, both in the military and upon your departure from the military. Both are hugely important, and I appreciate you have a much better capability of reminding me and other Kansans about the connection between what we do when we're not at war may prevent us from being at war. And you're right, lots of hot spots. So thank you for your willingness to take on responsibilities in both arenas. Why aren't we doing more? I would think that, unfortunately, it seems to me that sometimes administrations and perhaps members of Congress see the initial response to a problem with military force. And I think perhaps this is a broader conversation than maybe you intended, and certainly one I didn't think about we'd ever have on this discussion. But with an all voluntary military, it makes, in my view, too easy for the response to be military, as compared to trying all other aspects, diplomacy, as well as the things we've been talking about today. And so we ought to be much more cautious in our use of military force, again, last resort. And we just need, there's a lot of criticism of foreign aid in particular. I mentioned that phrase. I don't know how many times, but it's dozens, if not hundreds, in which Kansans have said, well, if we just quit spending money on foreign aid, we would have a balanced budget. And so there's this sense about the magnitude of this spending. And I think those spending programs, this amount of money spent on foreign aid is, less than 1% of the federal budget. But it's something that people see and read about. And particularly when it comes to countries that seemingly aren't our friends, it gets stuck in their craw, so to speak, and it bothers them that we're giving money to a country that isn't our friend. And I have that same reaction, but I'm clearly convinced that our ability to help others around the globe increase our own security and make our lives more secure, both from a military or security point of view and from an economic point of view. So I think it's incumbent upon people like all of you on this call who see some value in those kind of efforts to make sure that elected officials know that you see it that way, and call on us to do the things that are important and necessary to avoid a broader conflict that risked the life of you and your colleagues in the past.
I think that's why it's such a thoughtful comment. It's why we have over 30,000 veterans that have aligned with us, and what's it worth? It's worth the investment. Senator, you have a vote coming up, so I think we have time for one last question. I'm delighted to call on Courtney Brooks, who is the Executive Director of Global Ties with Kansas City and one of our wonderful next generation activists.
Courtney, it is true. I need to go cast. Courtney, it's true. I need to go cast a vote, and I do my own town hall meetings, and always I say, now there's time for one last question, and it's always the toughest one I ever get. So here we go,
good.
Courtney.
Okay. I'll try and keep it easy on you. So as a member of USGLC's Next Gen Leadership Program, I've seen firsthand now more than ever how imperative it is for our future leaders to have an understanding of their place in a global society, especially given the COVID-19 pandemic. I play a role in this education process through my work as Executive Director of Global Ties KC, where we connect the state of Kansas to the world via professional exchanges. In the last couple of years, we've also built out the Youth Diplomats program, now Youth Diplomats Institute, to provide high school students from across the state with opportunities for international learning and exchange. So my question for you is this: how can we all continue to encourage citizens of Kansas to engage in global issues? And what advice do you have for the next generation of Kansas leaders?
Well, Courtney, those two things may be related. I'm hearing your question for the first time, so I'm ill prepared for like a standard pat answer that maybe would sound better than what I'm capable of saying off the top of my head. But those two things may be related. Our children, my children, I know in my own family's experience, but it's true of your generation. They've seen more of the world, unless you were in the military and my parents' generation, and unless probably you had a significant amount of resources, money in my generation, you didn't see much of the world. And today, kids, young men and women, students across Kansas and across the country have the opportunity to be educated in countries around the globe, and church folks go on mission trips. And I think your generation, people today, in the teens and 20s and 30s have seen much more of the world. And bringing those experiences back to the rest of us is important. Back to me as an elected official, back to your church group, back to the Rotary Club or Civic Club in your hometown. Tell us what you saw, and also have the admonition to Kansans and to Americans about what we might be doing to make the world a more secure and safe place. I would think that in the light of COVID-19 and the pandemic consequences in the United States, that there would be an open mind about the value of our engagement in the world to stop the spread of a virus someplace before it gets to the United States. Not only is a humanitarian thing, it's saving the rest of the world, saving lives around the globe, but it also means a lot less damage, both personal and economic, both in the safe and well-being of Americans to take actions in advance. And so my only point there is with the COVID-19 so fresh in our minds, now is a good time to highlight the value of engagement in the world to protect ourselves and to live up to our moral responsibilities as human beings to care for others. So what you're doing today, what your involvement is in Kansas City, creates great opportunities for conversations to occur, and it's useful for Kansans to hear what you have to say.
Senator, I think you just gave one of the best answers of what it's worth and why we need to be engaged in the world. I know you got to go run and vote. We're going to let Alexander Moore, our Director of Central Outreach, close the program, but thank you for being part of this conversation today.
Well, Lynn and Liz and Dan, Secretary Glickman, Congresswoman, and Liz, thank you very much for allowing me to try to communicate with my constituents, and anybody that had questions that we didn't get to. I'm sorry for the vote. I thought it was supposed to start 15 minutes later. There is no clock around this United States Capitol. It just goes on its own time. And so I'm going to run across the street and cast a vote, but I'm pleased to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity that the job you've allowed me to have gives me to engage in issues that I think are important, not only to the world, but to the folks back home.
Thank you so much for joining us. Go run and vote. And
All
for
right.
everybody else, take care. Please join me in just allowing us to close with the person who really made all of this possible, which is my colleague, Alexandra Moyer, our Central Outreach Manager, who put this whole program together, and it's absolutely fabulous. Alexandra, over to you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Senator Moran. This was such a great and important conversation today. I also want to thank all of our Kansas Advisory Committee members and our Veterans for Smart Power who joined us today. As always, remember to thank the entire Kansas congressional delegation for their support for America's development and diplomacy programs. Your voice on what's it worth here at home truly makes a difference and is so important as part of USGLC's bipartisan nationwide coalition. To stay up to date with USGLC, please make sure you're on our mailing list at usglc.org and follow us on Twitter or wherever you're active on social media, and join our upcoming events in Kansas. We look forward to being back in person soon. Lastly, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll be in touch with the latest with what's happening on Capitol Hill. This was such a great event, and thank you again to Senator Moran for joining us. I hope you all have a great afternoon.